So Gwen, can I ask you to put the link to the document, the minutes, again in a few minutes while I'm talking? Good. Welcome to the session, Embeddings of I ADOPT in Existing Standards. This is the first and only session in this plenary of the working group I ADOPT. This working group was active, officially active, between 2019 and 21. Now we are in maintenance mode, so maintaining the deliverables, but for doing just maintenance, we are quite active actually. The motivation of this collaboration is to address the I of FAIR, the interoperability of existing terminologies addressing observable property descriptions. We also want to promote the use of FAIR terminologies to annotate research data. And actually, the group is led by 4 women, me included. So I am Barbara Magagna. I'm working at GoFair Foundation, and there I'm the FAIR Development Coordinator. But I'm also a PhD student at the University of Twente, writing my PhD on semantic interoperability. In addition, we have Gwen Mancoife here, who will also talk next. And Gwen is a biological oceanographer working at the vocabulary as a vocabulary governor of the NERC Vocabulary Server Management Group at the British Oceanographic Data Center. Another chair is Anusoria de Varayo, who is actually not here. And the 4th is Maria Stoica. She will also talk later. We also get lots of support and work done by Silko Schindler and Alison Pemmant and many more in this group. So we have actually already RDA endorsed recommendations published with the I ADOPT ontology and an I ADOPT GitHub repo, where you can find a lot of important resources that we created the last years. So this is very quickly what the I ADOPT recommendations is about. We are trying to describe observable properties. So just the middle part of the observation description that you find on the top. We are not including units. We are not including process description, the actual feature, but we are really focusing on the variable itself and decompose the description into atomic parts to then be better able to align them with existing terminologies. And for this, we have created an ontology, the I ADOPT ontology, that distinguishes between 4 important object properties: has constraint, has object of interest, has property, and has matrix. And all these terms or concepts should be taken from existing semantic artifacts or be created as individually accessible concepts. So this is the ontology very quickly. And now I would like just to give an update what we are doing in I ADOPT at the moment. So there's quite a lot going on. We are planning to do real interoperability tests for I ADOPT-based variable decompositions. We are seeking funds for developing an I ADOPT annotation service. We are doing this with colleagues from Germany. And we are working on I ADOPT implementations. For example, I work on ELTA standard observations. That's the next talk we will then present. We will also present about occurrence cubes, how we implemented that, the I ADOPT descriptions there. And also the open knowledge research graph implementation. That is also a talk of today. We also talk about embeddings and SSNO, observation, measurement, and samples, and sensor things API, and mappings to OBOE, EML, Darwin Core, all topics of the session today. We also think that there are related activities that need to be approached, and we are already working on this, but a bit as a side action, it's to verify methods and protocols descriptions. We also have applied to be a use case in the emerging fair mappings working group. Yeah, and we start now with creating a repository for the I ADOPT variables for having a better possibility to work with these also in the context of LLMs and automatic annotation services. So I will now pass over to Gwen, or yeah, I will do it for you, Gwen. The focus of this talk is I ADOPT for ELTA standard observations, fair variables, and future need for fair method descriptions.
Right, thank you, Barbara. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to introduce this presentation, and Barbara will take over to discuss the implementation aspect. So we're doing work on implementing I ADOPT for ELTA standard observations, and we will talk about the work we've been doing, issues we've encountered, but also about the future need for fair method descriptions, talking very briefly on that. So ELTA stands for long-term ecosystem research. It's a network of sites across Europe that have been operated for a long time, measuring a number of variables that are being used for addressing the key drivers of change for major European ecosystem and socio-ecological systems, and to look at how these changes affect ecosystem function, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. So next, please. So as part of the ELTA framework of observations, discussions have taken place among experts to select a number of variables that they called standard observations. And those variables goes across the whole spectrum of measurements, going from abiotic heterogeneity, biotic heterogeneity, fauna and flora, soil, air, habitat, water, budget, as well as socio-ecological measurements or observations. And in total, there is a desire to capture about 173 variables. Next, please. So with the standard observation concept, even though we are referring to them sometimes as variable, are effectively not variables. They are groupings of variables. They are not the things that are being measured or observed directly. They are actually groupings of observation of related measurements or observations on the ground, on the field. And for that regard, they are very similar to the essential variable concepts, which we discovered in the course of implementing I ADOPT to some of our essential ocean variables that we couldn't really just implement I ADOPT directly to it, because they are groupings, they are variable sets. So the essential variable concept, next please. I think if you can double click now, thank you. So basically, they are similar, and also they've got similar reason for being in grouping variables that are necessary for a particular purpose. And the selection of those variables is based on their relevance to that purpose, the feasibility of carrying the measurement on a big scale, and the cost effectiveness as well. And standard observations have, to some extent, overlaps with essential climate variable, essential biodiversity variable, and to a lesser extent, essential ocean variable, and also sociological parameters. So next, please. So basically, we're in a situation where we've got same drivers, the same measurements that can be used for multiple purposes. And those purposes have different requirements, different contexts, and also different terminologies. So it's very important that we keep that in mind, and we need that diversity of terminologies, but we need to be able to connect those different vocabularies together. Next, please. So the diversity of data reuse requires interoperable terminologies. And here we've got ELTA standard observation, next please, which will be captured at the variable level by fair variable descriptions, which themselves could be connected with other fair variable description or fair terminologies that might be actually used for essential climate variable groupings. And then obviously we will need to think about how do we relate the standard observation with the essential variable concepts as well. Next, please. And finally, we also want to eventually to establish some relationship with the standards organization like the BIPM, for example. Next, please. So how do we do that? And we've got I ADOPT, that framework that we designed, we've been working on for the last 4 years. Next, please. So when we worked on the essential ocean variable, that was the ontology we had, just the simple, the basic, the core I ADOPT ontology. Next, please. But then we realized this was not sufficient because an I ADOPT variable only can have one property and one only property and one object of interest and only one object of interest. So next, please. So we decided to come up with an extension to that ontology, and we created the variable set. Next, please. And that variable set introduced that new class, variable set, as well as 4 new properties, which we just basically similar. They mimic, they mirror the I ADOPT properties, but with as applicable in front of it. And that allows us to have one or many or none of those applicable property associated with a variable set, and a variable set can have members which are I ADOPT variables. Next, please. So this, next, if you click 3 times, sorry. So basically, Barbara just briefly mentioned it. Our future challenge is also to deal with fair terminology for method and protocol description. And this we were hoping to be able to present something about that, but we've run out of time. So it will be probably for the next, our priority for the next 6 months. Next, please. Yeah, and next. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gwen. So I will continue and I will talk about how we want to implement the description of these standard observations as variable sets in terminologies provided by the ELTER research infrastructure. So where I am actually the coordinator of the semantic artifacts. And for this, we have the ELTER SO vocabulary as a concept scheme. These standard observations are organized, are grouped in spheres. So we have 5 spheres: atmosphere, biosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, and sociosphere. And underneath, we have these standard observations modeled as SCOS members of these collections, but also as variable sets. And these variable sets themselves have also members, but the relation ontology member member relation for that we use in the I ADOPT extension to connect variable sets with variables. And these variables are actually modeled in the ENFTES vocabulary and not in the ELTER SO vocabulary. Here you see a little bit the overview. We have now defined 68 different ELTER standard observations under the 5 spheres. And in total, we have around 112 standard observation variables, and we decompose them with I ADOPT. Yeah, with we identify the properties and different entities playing different roles, like the object of interest, the matrix, the context object, and the constraint. You see here that we are using for the spheres the ELTER SO vocabulary, as also for the standard observation. For the variables, the ENFTES. And for property, we are using ENFTES and QDT. We are using ENFTES also for constraints and for the matrix, but for the object of interest and the context of object, we are using, for the object of interest, we are using many other vocabularies. And the context object for the LTSO variables are actually really reusing the spheres, for example, from the LTSO vocabulary, mostly for that. Yeah, we are mostly using that. So you see that there is a need to have to also provide fair mappings because we are using also other vocabularies, but we use the I ADOPT ontology as a mapping ontology. And we would like to collaborate with the fair mappings group to really be able to represent this properly. So for being able to decompose variables, we need to analyze them first. And then for this process, we really need to know more about the method and the units that are applied to be able to really decompose it, because the property may change considerably depending on the method and also the unit that it will be applied. Without this, it will be too fuzzy and really difficult to do this. So I do this in an extra sheet, and I involve all the experts of the ELTA standard of the ELTA research infrastructure from the different domains to model it together with me. At the end, I can analyze. I can also have some results on the variable pattern that I'm going to apply, because from this, I can really learn how to do it in future decomposition. And I think these need to be referable themselves. So example, soil hydraulic conductivity. You see here how we have decomposed it with the property flow rate per unit pressure. The object of interest is water. The matrix is soil. And you see here how this is represented as a turtle file. We have now a repository called I ADOPT variables, which I propose to really use and to populate, where we can upload these turtle files, but where we also can discuss them as issues if we are not sure about their decomposition. And I created a template for discussing these decompositions. Last mention here, we don't have only quantitative variables, but also qualitative variables, which actually require a controlled list for the answers, for the results. And here you see how this is linked. So we have the standard observations for the variable sets. We have the variables and their description components. For those we are using ENVDAS, but for the controlled list, we have ELTA-CL, which will be linked via an observation model or Shackle rules, so that these are connected. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to pass over the screen to Sylvain. Sylvain, you can take over. Sylvain is an agronomist, and he works in OGC, in ISO, Inspire, W3C, and on RDA standards, and has worked on best practices in many communities. We don't hear you yet.
Oh, sorry, it was muted. Shall I go? I can start?
Yes, please.
Okay. So yeah, actually I forgot to write in my bio that I'm working for the French Geological Survey, BRGM. So the attempt at that presentation is to see how we can embed I ADOPT in the current W3C and OGC standards. And Barbara and some other colleagues helped me on that one. So big picture, there is currently a W3C World Wide Web Consortium and Open Geospatial Consortium cooperation going on. That allows to have, to some degrees, joint activities. And some of the well-known output of that activities are like the spatial data on the web best practices that built on top the data on the web best practice from W3C, GeoSparkle activity, and SSN, SOSA ontology. The way that cooperation is done, it allows to publish also joint standards. So I draw quickly a list of some of the recap of what the spatial data and the web spatial data group is producing, and some of the groups on the OGC side that are interested and contributed to that, like geosemantics, observation and measurement, which I represent here. I'm a co-chair of the group, and some others, like, of course, when there are discussion around metadata and DCAT, there are joint discussion and stuff like that. In the context of that IADOPT discussion, what do we mean by W3C OGC standard? Core, as you'll see in the presentation, will be the OGC ISO standard observations, measurement, and samples, recently revised last year. SSN SOSA and OGC Sensor Things API, and some other initiatives that are appearing in the landscape, like OGC building blocks. So how are those observations and sample standard related? So in the center of the slide, you see OMS. That's short for observation, measurement, and samples. And if you look on the left side of the screen on the semantic web part of the word, what's going on in the current revision of SSN SOSA is it's been acted that SSN SOSA will act as the canonical representation of the standard. And if you look on the right side of the screen, more API word-oriented discussion. Sensor Things is definitely the weapon of choice to share observation data. And Sensor Things is built on the previous version of OMS that was called just Observation and Measurement. And we currently have the draft 2.0 working towards full implementation of OMS. The version status, I guess I already scratched that. OMS finished last year. SSN SOSA, the revision is ongoing. We're having weekly meeting, and we target an update or public for comment circulation by the end of 2024. And on the right side, Sensor Things is currently in version 1.1, and we already have a 2.0 version already available. Same timeline as SSN SOSA in a way, plus or minus real life, but that's the timeline. How are those linked with IADOPT? So if we keep looking in the center line, OMS, we already discussed that in the group. There are some prototypes. I will show that in a couple of seconds in other slides. And we need to have a formal testing with the OMS logical model being available soon. On the left side, the link with SSN SOSA has been discussed also. Discussion being also is that should that be part of a kind of an observable property extension of SSN SOSA, or should that just reach the core? I just give the link to one of the issue we've got currently open, or closed it recently actually. Also on linking observing procedures and observable property. I mentioned that here because I felt it was relevant for this group. And on the Sensor Things API side, we already drafted evolution of some of Sensor Things API part on one reference implementation that is Frost Server done by Fraunhofer. So there are prototypes lying around, and one of the thing we want to do short-term kind of activities, make those prototype discussion more concrete. Quick words for those that are not available. I mean, accustomed to all the three of those standards. I guess you are not bothered by the bar on the top. So I just reused that image, OMS, SSN SOSA, and Sensor Things. So OMS, just 2 words on that. There are 2 core parts of it. The first one is the part that corresponds to the observation. So an observation is an act carried out by an observer here to determine the value of a property of a feature of interest using the procedure, and you can also describe your host deployment of observer, and of course you provide the result. The second part of OMS, and we try to give more emphasis on this one by indeed also renaming the standard, is the sampling part. It was in ONM before, but less used, that's too bad. So observation also can be related to, actually it's the other way around, the sampling word. So you have sampling exercise involving samplers that take samples, I don't know, like rock samples, water sample taken out of a river, for example, where that can be described better various procedures, and those samples are related to observation. That's just the nutshell of OMS. We have a sort station here. If we go to the right side, SensorSyncs API here, again, it implements OMS. The way I present that version 1.1 of SensorSyncs is the following. Using layman's term, it would be like you have a collection, time series, of observation of rainfall amount in a zone around a meteo station, for example. Your method would be rain gauge, and your observer slash sensor slash station would be that meteo station next to Strasbourg in France. And if you just reuse the same schema with a term from that version of the standard, we just don't see much change, apart that you have sensor here, data stream, and thing. The rain is not so different. So SensorSyncs is indeed implementing OMS, and there is a huge uptake of that API in many communities that want to share environmental observation and more. If we go to SOSA, everything that is here are snapshots from the current work. As I said, it's work in progress, the revision. So in SOSA, you have a part that is observation perspective, I would say, in those fossil drawings. You see again the same thing. Observation on a feature of interest. You already see inputs from OMS. You see difference with feature of interest, ultimate feature of interest. You observe what unobservable property using the procedure and through a sensor, and you obviously have a result. And also you have the equivalent of the sampling part from OMS in SOSA. So I want to describe that. Slides would be available anyhow. A quick copy paste from the discussion ongoing on observable property and procedures. We are just working on that. And again, the discussion will be how do we extend that to include I ADOPT. There is also, it's more kind of a by the way image, there is also an actuation side of SSN SOSA that could interest people describing their acquisition process, for example. So how do OMS and I ADOPT work together? A quick example of what OMS can do, and then I will add I ADOPT. Your observation could be like water height at that station on the Rhine River in France, and between France and Germany, for example. And the observing procedure will be gauge 8, and your result will be that one. That's keep it super simple example. If we move to a more advanced example, that will involve samples. So you will still have that right part that does not change much actually, and you have a bunch of attributes. But here, the interesting part of that example is that you can describe with OMS the fact that you have sampling points located within a water quality station, that green box, on the river, that's still feature of interest, and then you describe the whole sampling strategy. Bigger bucket of water that is being subsampled and stuff like that, and from the ops, you can differentiate where the fact that your observation ultimate feature of interest will be like your Rhine River, but your proximate, the actual feature you're doing the measurement on is your water sample. There are limits, and they're well known of how we describe the observable properties in OMS. We just have like that observed property role to that class, and many information systems around the globe end up with like a long list of observed property list. And on purpose, that's just an example focused on nitrates. So we met the two together, and yeah, an example of the limit is here. If you just observe through that procedure nitrate in water, are you actually working on the aqueous phase of water or the particle phase of it? You cannot differentiate that from here, or unless you have a huge list of properties. I will sketch the first example on river gauge, but the best is this one. So still, if you remember 2 slides before, our guy wondering how to differentiate that it observed nitrate in the aqueous phase of water versus particle phase. That's what I ADOPT allows us to do, as you know, and it was presented before on other example from ELTR. But it works quite well. And bottom line is actually I ADOPT covered what we had in an issue like 2019, 5 years ago in OMS revision. So many thanks for that. If we go back to the initial question, and everything that is on that slide is of course to be discussed in further details. I just Food for thought we had with some discussion with Barbara and co-chairs from OMS, bit of SSN and sensor things is given the context I introduced at the beginning, I'm reassuring you, Barbara, that's just my last slide for the timekeeping stuff. So it's worth initiating two parallel activities that will cross-fertilize. There is security here that several of us are involved actually in OMS and O&M related work and sensor things and SSN as well. So obviously we try not to be schizophrenic and propose different modeling artifacts. So one thread would be through the OGC O&M standard working group to have work on an OMS observable property model, including I ADOPT, so within the OMS logical model. And when it's clear, we propose that as an extension of sensor things, because if you remember, sensor things implements OMS. On the other side, there are discussions to how to handle observable property description in SSN SOSA as well. And then we will model it so that it does not go into different directions. Bottom line, I said that twice already, let's say that thrice. The bottom line and the target is not to have different models from what I call A1 here and from this, of course. Slight note, through the process, the idea, and we will involve everyone who raise hands, the idea is to respect the initial vision from I ADOPT, though there might be adjustment in the not in the semantics, but in the terms in some places. And one example I gave at the bottom is initially in SSN SOSA, we had platform deployment sensor. In OMS, it was included in like more host deployment observer for a reason I could develop, but I have no time here. But the core definition underneath are still the same. I just was willing to raise that slight information. And yeah, I guess I'm almost on time. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Any immediate questions to Sylvain? We will have a discussion part at the end as well,
Okay.
but if there's something right now that pops up, please go ahead. We are a small group. In the meantime, I ask Maria to share the screen. Maria has been a core team member developing the scientific variable ontology since 2016, and she is keen on driving fair descriptions of research data. Maria, are you there? Can you share your screen?
Hi, sorry. Sorry, Barbara, would you mind sharing for me?
Yeah,
because
so
otherwise I need to log off. I'm sorry.
Okay. Embedding, no, I have, no, yeah, I have it. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't have the screen permissions to share for some reason.
Okay. I have just to download this because otherwise it will not be seen very well. Give me a sec. Okay. Is this one? Yeah. Then I will share it. I hope you can see it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I'll be briefly talking about potential mapping from I ADOPT to the extensible observation ontology, or OBO with an E. And here in this diagram, I'm just showing the relevant subset of entities from OBO that pertain to I ADOPT. So here you can see these interlinked entities, which are the OBO entity, the characteristic, the observation, and the measurement. And on the next slide, I show, this is the definition for an OBO entity, which is that it's an object. As examples, there's a tree or a community or an ecological process. And entities in OBO constitute the foci of observations. And every observation is of exactly one entity. So given that definition, an OBO entity maps to the I ADOPT entity, coupled with the I ADOPT object property has object of interest, which assigns a role to an entity. So I ADOPT has a role independent definition of the term entity. And an OBO characteristic represents a property of an entity that can be measured. Examples are height, length, or color. That maps one-to-one with the I ADOPT property. And on the next slide, I show the definition for the OBO observation, which is that it's an assertion that an entity was observed by an observer. In addition to this, OBO also includes in the definition of observation that observations are often made within a broader context. And it says the context of an observation is given by other observations, implying that an observed entity, and specifically each corresponding measurement, contextualizes another observed entity and its corresponding measurements. Now, although I ADOPT does not have any specific components related to observations, I ADOPT does have this role assignment from the variable to an entity with an object property called has context object. And so even though this is not necessarily going to be a one-to-one mapping, there will very likely be some overlap here. What falls under the context of an observation and what I ADOPT calls a context object. And so yeah, this is our open-ended interpretation right now of a mapping between I ADOPT and OBO. And if at the end anyone wants to jump in and give feedback, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So yeah, Sylvain said there is also an alignment between SSN and SOSA and OBO. In the meantime, you see here the slides from Hannah. Hannah has a long work history with biodiversity data standards and working with GBIF data. And she works now at the CSC IT Center for Science. Please.
Yes, the classical, I lost the unmute button here. So I was tasked to talk about EML and then GBIF standards. So they are actually TADWIG standards. The TDWG stands for former Taxonomical Data Working Group, which is nowadays called Biodiversity Information Standards Organization, and its relation to I ADOPT. And I must say I'm not too familiar with I ADOPT, but this is more to raise questions and call for expertise so that we could start working with the mappings between ecological metadata language and also GBIF standards and I ADOPT. So EML, ecological metadata language, is old, well-established, community-maintained XML schema for research or environment research metadata. And since the latest versions, EML has been modular, but it's still pure XML. It's mostly used for kind of bibliographic information for citing data sets in data catalogs, but it's very extensive, so it can be then amended along the way to describe in more detail research projects, methods, structural information about the data, and also the attributes and their units and other properties inside the datasets. EML adopts much of its syntax from other metadata standards and that have evolved from the expertise of groups in the other disciplines. And it has a strong typing, so within elements, so it allows validation by using these standards. And there's the link to discover more about the features. And what I found out now when I started this, trying to discover or learn how to align it or where does it overlap with I ADOPT, I figured out that it's actually possible to express variables inside EML by annotating external semantic resources. But then on the other hand, there is huge elements in EML, like attributes and unit level elements, where there's a lot of possibilities for expressing variables and their context in great detail. And this is where I definitely would need help both ways. I don't know EML well enough, and I don't know I ADOPT well enough to evaluate where these things can be used together and how to do that. So the EML annotation can be done to internal or imported elements, and there are several hierarchy levels because it is an XML schema, so it is very hierarchic. But there were some suggestions of those entities that can have attributes and variables in them. And then here they had this unit type definitions. And in the picture, you can see a list of attributes that could be potentially usable and expressible and mappable to I ADOPT, but it's very, very extensive. So help would be needed and appreciated. Then on the other hand, GBIF standards, which I know better than the EML. GBIF also uses EML for dataset level metadata to describe the environment where the dataset comes from and what other measurements are done while collecting the biological biodiversity data. So Darwin Core and its extensions are maintained by this TADWIC, Biodiversity Information Standards Organization, and they are used by GBIF, Global Biodiversity Information Facility, to aggregate biodiversity data to be searched on data level globally. Yeah, so Darwin Core is primarily based on taxa, their occurrence in nature as documented by observation specimen samples. So that's evidence about the occurrence and related information. GBIF uses Darwin Core to aggregate the data in data level, as I mentioned, and then there are extensions that also allow using external vocabularies and ontologies to be used with many of the elements. Additionally, there are also these extensions have vocabularies in themselves, and these extensions are created for expressing certain thematic areas in biodiversity. So for instance, there's an extension for collecting multimedia evidence of occurrences. So you can express better, more detailed information about sound files or images that are used to document an species occurrence. And then I tried to look into what could be done with Darwin Core and which extensions could be aligned with I-ADOPT. So in the Darwin Core itself, there are places like it gives context and about the location and also basic information about the taxa, which may also have properties. And this would be something that would be needed also in I-ADOPT. And then the measurement of fact extension or the extended measurement of fact extension, which also allows usage of external vocabularies, but then it's possible to also express any measurement of fact with these terms. And it links to the event, which also has variables. So event is used for telling how this sampling was done, where and when, and what was the protocol. So there are also variables that are important part of the data and describes its characteristics.
Thank you very much, Hannah.
Pardon?
So you have still, but we have not a lot of time, so you have to.
Yes. So I'm coming to an end. This is mainly, I could just skip and tell that I'm kind of would like to ask if there are experts from about like who know EML or Darwin Core and who would be interested in working with us about these alignments with I-ADOPT. And then we was also discussing with Klaus Weiland from Schenkenberg, who says he wants to start working with EML and its mapping. So we were wondering if it would be possible to use an existing mapping like Oboe EML or something else to create a pipeline to help aligning with I-ADOPT. And then also maybe we should collaborate with the Tadwick mappings interest group and obviously the RDA interest group that is being, the mappings group that is being established at the moment. So this was basically my presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah. I think there's quite something still to do, but it's a very good preparation of this mapping work. Now the next talk is actually a talk by me and by Sharif Islam, and I hope I can share my screen again. And you will see in a moment slides, and in full mode. Okay, perfect. So I will start and just introduce the topic. So the interest of this talk is that we want to really understand complex biodiversity patterns, and this requires to overcome data silos. And data cubes offer really a powerful way how to combine this data across multiple dimensions. Interoperability between data sets, terms, and variable descriptions are very important for good analysis. And for this, we need a combination of different data models like the data cubes, metadata standards, and mapping frameworks. And this is exactly what we tried out in a hackathon that happened in Brussels at the beginning of April, the BQ hackathon, where we applied with a project. And we use data cubes to organize data in a multidimensional structure. Because we think that cubes are very good in facilitating computation across different dimensions, slices, collapsing the dimensions and dicing to extract the information that we need by combining this data. So a very specific use case for a data cube are occurrence cubes, where what we want to analyze is the taxonomy, the species, and the when is the temporal information, the where is the spatial information organized in this cube. And for each dimension, we have to define the extent, the resolution, and the uncertainty. And we include there the counts of the records to really identify where a specific species has been observed when. And the B-Cube hackathon was again using the ELTA standard observation data sets as the use case, represented as occurrence cubes. We annotated those with fair vocabularies, again with emphasis, and describe them with fair metadata and represent them as fair digital objects using AeroCrate to enable integrations with environmental and weather data for the identifications of drivers of change. And the team that collaborated is mentioned here. So it's the core team of the ELTA research infrastructure from Austria, but also Hannah Koivola was involved from the ELTA team, but also Sharif Islam and Lopez Gordillo from BioDT, people from the PAC initiative, the Kimberley Risk Assessment, some fellows from GoFair Foundation, and also a colleague of Klaus Wieland, Alexander Volodkin, and Ima Serra from CREAF. Thank you for their contribution. So the focus was a site in Söbelboden, a master site, the ELTA Söbelboden, with about 90 hectares in a karst catchment. This master site measures air pollution, climate change, biodiversity effects. And it's part of the awesome contribution of the ICP integrated monitoring. And the data sources we looked into were the plant species cover that are observed now for over 20 years. And the birds occurrence data from 1997 and 2005. And meteorological data from 1995 to 2017. We combined all them and focused on the year 2005. And I pass over to Sharif. Sharif is a data architect at the Naturalis Biodiversity Center in Leiden. And yeah, he helped here a lot. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Barbara. So what we try to think about in the hackathon is that how can we make this a little bit more actionable with actual data. So in the later you'll see that we made some scripts to try to make it a little bit more programmable. So of course a lot of these things needed some manual work, so we had different data files. We needed to also normalize a few things, and as you saw in the previous slide, that we had common things. The site was common, the year was common, but the plant data and the bird data and the meteorological data, they're all in a different things. However, there are common elements we found, so we had to do some semantic disambiguation. So there's some Python script that did that. And then, of course, the format has to be changed, and then we had to enrich a few things. So all of these things needed some manual work. And then basically we created a package with Python libraries and also the AeroCrate to describe it. And then, we try to publish them in the Arrow Hub. And in between, there are some metadata elements that I'll go into. The next slide. So this is kind of like the process. So the Jupyter Notebook, as I said, tried to kind of create the workflow. And if you go to the GitHub, you'll see how it works. And then the part of the AeroCrate that at the moment is basically a simple JSON description where you can combine different data sources, software to describe in a very high level what we try to do. So the AeroCrate will give you an idea that this, let's say this hackathon task has all of these three data, and it has some Python script. and some description for that. But for the detailed description, if you go to the next one, so this here you can see some of the data wrangling that we had to do to get to the stage. And then after that, so this is the AeroCrate package. So one nice thing about the AeroCrate package is that the JSON description has some standard way of describing things, but it has some flexible format too. So for example, in this screenshot, you can see that this, let's say this package has some files, but it also has software code, and the software code has some dependencies with the environmental variables. So this can be very easily be automated in a script. However, we need some little bit more, if you go to the next one, we need some little bit more, metadata description where the data cube will come in. So in the description on the right-hand side, you will see what we try to do, of course, pick existing data standards as much as possible from Darwin Core, and there's some of the Darwin Core extension that Hanna just mentioned. And then in the data cube section, you will see that different types of data cubes are coming in together. And again, they're different. And then what we did is that we tried to insert the variables of I ADOPT that will be a common observed property. So in the section, you see that in this particular example, we had temperature, and then the constraint and all the property that comes with the I ADOPT ontology, we try to insert that. And this could be a sort of a metadata file that could be part of the project. And what this gives us is that, it captures all of this, observed property in a structured way. And we can point to a identifier or URI with a precise definition. And there could be a lot of different names, but I think as you can see, that it gives the richer description, and different people can use different terms, but we can align them based on this ID. And this can also help us when we make the scripts. So what we try to do is that, of course, the diverse data sets coming in, and in the data cube, we tried to kind of combine them and see how it's possible. So in a simple example, we were trying to do that, and we were successful. And then all of these things became sort of occurrence cube that could be published in GBIF as in the Global Biodiversity data portal for sharing and reusability. So I think that's sort of the goal of the hackathon. I think we were happy with how it came about. However, there's a lot of details still we need to figure out, how we prepare the data cube, how we connect, all the wrangling, and of course, trying to map with different stuff as well. So I think that's basically summary.
Yeah, thank you very much. And by the way, we won the 3rd place for the interoperability use case.
Yeah.
No, it was a really interesting collaboration. Now we have the last speaker, and this is Markus Stocker. Can you, or probably I have to share this for you. Is that correct, Markus? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my camera doesn't work. So yeah, you can share if you like. No problem. Yeah.
Good. Markus Stocker is a leader of Knowledge Infrastructure Research Group at Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology. And yeah, I hope I can share. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now, sorry, I'm joining for another conference, sitting here in the hallways. So thanks very much, Barbara, for the invitation to talk in this session. I will talk a little bit about a different application of I ADOPT to describe variables for different kind of data, different kind of research data, which maybe is a little bit exotic and uncommon in the context of, generally speaking, scientific knowledge graphs, in particular for the open research knowledge graph. So this is research data that is expressed in articles. So it's different from your typical primary data that comes from observation or satellite imagery and so on. Just a second, I will tell you when. Yeah, so it's about scientific knowledge encoded in articles, and I think this knowledge should be understood as fair research data as well. Next slide, please. instead, however, we bury this research data into narrative text documents, and this is something that has been observed since a long time. Baden Mons was maybe one of the first also highlighting this in a paper. Next slide, please. So let's look at a concrete example. So this is an expression or a representation of a t-test. A classical hypothesis test where you have a figure that shows you the data points that are input to this test as plotted box plots here. And then you have a sentence that says the conclusion about the t-test, that there is a significant difference in means between two groups. It doesn't really matter what this is in life science here. And then you typically have also the p-value reported in one or the other form, and also link to the so-called dependent variable, which is here on the y-axis and also in the sentence. So this is a clearly unfair description of data. So both the data points are not really machine readable. The p-value is inaccurate and also not machine readable. And also there is no link to IRE binding activity in ontology. So machines can really not do much with this data. For humans, it's great, but for machines, it's hardly reusable. Next slide, please. So we have been doing this indeed since the very beginning of science publishing. So here you can see centuries of ways how we have communicated scientific knowledge in papers in document form, narrative text documents. Of course, now it's all born digital. So we have PDFs, Word documents, but in a way we don't have, so the machines are not supporting us really in processing this information very well. Next slide, please. And this is what we try to address with the so-called Open Research Knowledge Graph. So this is a database and infrastructure that tries to apply the FAIR data principles to scientific information encoded in the literature. Next slide, please. And if you do this, you have, maybe it's a bit small on the screens, but you can have rich descriptions, structured descriptions of the research findings that are published in the literature. So here, so you have a number of properties that describe what was done, what kind of method, maybe a statistical method that was applied. And this method relates then the input data that was used, the computation that was performed, and also with the output data. And classically, you have maybe a process here, a linear mixed model planned process that have a number of steps, an ANOVA computation, a linear regression, and the fitting of a large language model, linear mixed model. Sorry, I'm confusing always the two terms here. And you can see you have interlinked visualizations, but also the input and output data. Next slide, please. In another case, here we can also interlink the code so that you can grab this code and essentially reproduce exactly this figure and the results that were computed in a computational manner in this research finding. Next slide, please. So, and one example also that you can do once you have all this information in a database, you can of course create comparisons here for COVID-19 basic reproduction number estimates. Think Amazon product comparisons, right? You have structured information. You can simply tell the machine, please compare results according to some dimensions that are shared. Next slide, please. So how does this relate to I ADOPT? I just quickly run you through an example. So here we have a linear mixed model, input model, and that's the description of the model. So we have a linear mixed model is usually a response variable, a number of fixed effect terms here too, and the random effect terms. And each of these response variable, fixed effect terms, and random effect terms are essentially variables. And here I'm looking at one term in particular, the meadow proportion in a region, and the region has a radius of 250 meters. This is the information that was published also in the paper. You can see this typically in the plot then, or information that, yeah, Exactly. Thank you, Barbara. So the variable, and here we have adopted I-ADOPT. You can already see from the properties that we are showing here. So I'm looking at the meadow proportions, the proportion of meadow as a field in a region of 250 meters in radius. This is a case in agroecology. So the meadow proportion has an object of interest. In this case, that's the meadow as a kind of field. And has a matrix that will be the region, right? And we are looking at a property of the proportion of meadow in this region. And this region, if you go to the next slide, please, has a constraint, right? We said that the region has 250 meters, so we can also use here vocabulary that comes from I-ADOPT is constrained by. We can also interlink the region with external terminologies, and that goes on now iteratively. If you click on 250 meter radius, next slide, please, you will see that this is, of course, also described using QUDT as 250, the numeric value, and the unit in meter. So we have also, we disambiguate what M concretely means. This would be on the x-axis in the plot, you would have 250 meters as a label. And in the manuscript, in the article, it's clear from the context to humans, but for machines, it's often not clear what an M or a C concretely means. And here we have a rich description that is machine readable. If you click on M, you will, of course, get information about the unit here, meter, the UCUM code, and also again links to external vocabulary. So next slide, please. So as quickly as a takeaway, I think it's clear that we need machines to better support us in processing scientific knowledge. There is just so much of it. Yearly, we publish about 5 to 7 million papers worldwide. And processing all this, even in your narrow field, you might have thousands of articles that come out, even for a narrow domain of science. And just staying on top of this literature is really becoming harder and harder. So having machines supporting us in processing this knowledge, finding it better, comparing it, finding what is the state of the art with one click, how does the performance of algorithms develop in a community over the last 10 years or so. These are the tasks that we could use machines, and they would support us in generating these outputs. The traditional approach is, of course, to structure data. So from the unstructured natural language text document, we will structure this data and then we'll build databases. I think I-ADOPT, in addition to doing this work for the primary data sets, the classical Excel sheets, NetCDF data or HDF5 data, I think we can apply this also to scientific knowledge expressed in articles to structure the variables there as well. Or the alternative, now that everybody's talking about large language models, the question is, of course, if in the future we actually need to do this work, we need to build databases, or these language models will just perform as well on the corpus of natural language text. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Marco, thank you very much. I have an immediate question. Isn't it possible to combine I-ADOPT with large language models? Wouldn't that be a way forward?
Yeah, I think so. The question of combination, I think we have already talked about this, Barbara, that we can maybe use large language models to structure variables. So you have sort of a list of unstructured description or just labels of complex properties or observables. And then you use a large language model to provide a context, right? You say, okay, I want this property to be structured in property or feature, in matrix, and unit. And please also align to a set of ontologies. And I think they do quite well in sort of that task. So that would be an intermediate step to indeed sort of integrate large language models that they would support that task of structuring the variables in the data set. Yes.
But would then a repository of I-ADOPT decomposed variables help in this work?
I think so. So for the evaluation, so I think it would be interesting for large language models. We don't need to train them, so they are already available. So but we could evaluate, for instance, how ChatGPT performs on structuring variables. And for this, it would be great to have a data set where we have the unstructured string and then a corresponding structured IADOPT description. So we're going to evaluate how well the algorithm really performs. For the classical approaches, largely NLP or even regular expression-based approaches there, we might want to train also an algorithm. And for that also it will be useful to have a training data set to give some examples to train some machine learning model to do that task.
When?
Gwen,
When
sorry.
Sorry, you have your question. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just, I mean, when I saw your presentation, immediately I saw the value in applying this kind of approach for methods. So capturing, so, you know, you might, I think it's going to be quite challenging to actually extract variable information according to IADOPT from papers, but if you combine it with unit and method, then you might have a combination of fields that could then be analyzed against knowledge base that contain information related to variables, measurements, methods, units, because then you've got more information together to actually qualify what has been measured effectively.
Yeah. Sure. So also in the context, so some methods are implemented by instruments, right? So I think also there you have the observed variables, and of course, if the sort of the infrastructures or the communities would create these structured descriptions around methods, then you can interlink these already available descriptions about the methods, including the variables. Then when you extract maybe, you know, a reference to some instrument or some method in a paper, you could link to the existing resource already. So you wouldn't do it as an extraction task, right, from the papers, but you would then capitalize on that resource being available already described in some repository. So if that's what you meant.
So we have, thank you very much. We have more than 15 minutes still left for discussion, and we want to address two additional topics here. First, this links also to something that Sylvain has addressed, that they in SOSA, SSNO, and OMS, you have also the procedures modeled, or we need also to verify actually the description of procedures. I think there is quite some overlap, but the focus at the moment is still IADOPT and how IADOPT as such, the observable property description, can link to OGC standards. So and if actually it is a good idea to have OGC as the next home of the child IADOPT. You know, we have dedicated the last years to develop the ontology and also the extension of the ontology IADOPT and did some implementation, but still manual implementation. Before it can be fully automatized, I think we have to really prove that this works and prove the interoperability it promises, and then also to really implement it in a standard like the OGC standards. So I would like to initialize here the discussion. The second topic that I also want to introduce here is the fair mappings use case, because we have Jan Lefranc here. He is from the emerging working group fair mappings. So please go ahead if you have any input to these two topics, and also my question to the core group: what do you think if we work together with OGC in making this a major improvement and standard? I don't know if there was a hand that I saw before and not. Jan.
Well, I can start. Thank you all for this presentation. I've been following up I ADOPT, but I have to admit that I missed the ones in the last RDA plenary, so it's really nice to see all the progress that is being made in the usage of I ADOPT, and also that it's still alive even after the working group. So we'll use the working group as a source of inspiration for our own working group. Now, what came out of all these discussions and the presentation is that there is a need for huge effort in doing mappings, and mapping is not easy. It takes a lot of time and resources. For instance, I take the example of Hannah. She was calling for help because she needs experts on the specific schemas. And that means that all the mappings that are going to be generated are extremely valuable resources. Whether they're right or wrong, or we want to actually change them, it's another matter. But I think, and that's why we created the working group, these mappings that are expensive to generate and very hard to generate needs to be shared and needs to be reused as much as possible. Although we're considering things like using LLMs and things like that to help out with these tasks, still, we are not at the point where we can trust the output of these LLMs, so they will need verification. So it might be a way to accelerate the process to get the mappings, but then the verification and the curation of these resulting mappings still will take a lot of time. So that's why we have this fair mapping working group that we are trying to create now, so that we can discuss about how to represent, how to make this mapping fair, what kind of machine actionable model you can use, or machine readable at least, models you can use to share them. One of the issue is all the mappings that are going to be generated with I ADOPT needs to be documented and justified, right? So that's a lot, that's why it's a lot of work. Okay, so what I do see is that you have a lot of use cases that could be actually very interesting for our working group, because the I ADOPT cover both the semantics, but it also has a link with the data. We've seen that with the data cube, and that's something that we discussed in the context of a DAX tool workshop, is that when we tried very simple, I call that dummy use case, but it's actually a spreadsheet with measurements of lead concentration in a river and counting fish on the other side, and you try to aggregate them, you realize that mappings are not only at the semantic level, but they have impact on the data integration, and you need to start thinking about the data transformation to actually merge them together. So that's very interesting. And I think that we could work together in trying to formalize your use cases with concrete example, so that we could use all the mappings that you are generating and the diversity of mappings as an example for us to start building up the model to share them and to represent. Of course, when you start dealing with semantics, the first recommendation we came up with for the working group, but it's coming from the Fair Impact project, is use SESAM as much as you can. It's a very good model for semantic mapping between concepts and ontologies, and it's pretty straightforward. I've seen that most of the mappings have been done on tables or spreadsheets. The good thing is SESAM is a spreadsheet format, so it doesn't change much, but it just adds so much metadata and information of the mappings. And it also helps, further specifying the relation between the concepts. So I would suggest trying to formalize some sets of mappings you already have done into SESAM and see how it works and what are the limitations. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask something also that you can then answer later. Do you see that I ADOPT is also a mapping ontology? Because it's a mapping for a specific use case. Yes, it decomposes something existing to then actually map. When?
Well, I can answer straight ahead, but maybe Gwen first and then Gwen, go ahead.
We don't hear you.
Yeah, you're muted, I guess.
Yeah, it's just to extend that idea about the multiple use cases that I ADOPT might offer the Fair Impact working group. And one of them we discussed recently with Barbara is the situation where you might want to do an I ADOPT decomposition on variables that you don't host. So it's also that need for having repositories for, so centralized repositories for mappings, because we can't always host them in the facilities where we are running our own vocabularies. So that's another use case.
And can you just say why we think that IADOPT is a mapping ontology, a bridging ontology? Then probably Jan can say something about it.
No, I'd like to know why Jan doesn't think it is.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, if you look at IADOPT, and for instance, we had the presentation of SOSA, there are two models of observable properties. They are ontologies of observable properties, not ontologies of mappings. They are used to actually map into a common model, which is IADOPT. So IADOPT is a model for describing observable properties in details with context and so on. It's a very great tool, but it's an ontology to which you want to map other ontologies, right? Like SOSA. So you wouldn't say SOSA is a mapping ontology.
Well, it's
It's an
so
ontology that you use for mappings.
Also, Jan, we use it as well to connect SCO's vocabularies.
It's the same. But you use it as the connection is you map some SCO's vocabulary concepts to your IADOPT ontology, right?
No, we map between different ontologies or representations of variables via the IADOPT ontology, because we decompose both, and then we see how they integrate, how they actually can be mapped to each other.
Yeah, maybe it's really, I mean,
Hey, yeah, I won't call SOSA a mapping ontology. I mean, it's just that it's a meta model like OMS, so it can be used all across various domains. And it turns out that many domains, to some extent, already had a first go, be it in UML or ontology, as are describing their domain, but with kind of domain entrenched term, and just that the SOSA ontology is in a way level higher in the way of modeling it. So indeed, in SOSA we have alignment models with Oboe and some others, but you can align every ontology with some others when it makes sense. But it's not a mapping ontology per se. It just should be used to describe semantic sensor networks and semantically tagged payloads and data exchange. So
Sylvain, for us actually, and also Jan, for us, IADOPT has multiple purposes. One purpose is to better describe observable properties, but another purpose, and that's what Gwen actually uses together with other terminologies, is really to see how different variable descriptions map to each other, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's, I mean, I don't think we should lose too much time on
I think
labeling.
The reason why I say no is when you say it's a mapping ontology, it's an ontology that represents mappings.
Yeah.
So I just put the link of an existing ontology, which is called SEMAPV, which has been developed by the SESOM people. So it represents the process of mappings. It represents types of mappings like data mapping, semantic mapping. This would be a mapping ontology. Now, what would be IADOPT is a reference ontology for observable property. That's fine for me. But I wouldn't call that a mapping ontology.
It's just a mapping ontology for variable descriptions. So, but we can talk in your session about it because we do a lot of these already. It's just focused on that. Yeah, it's just the small focus on this. But yeah, let's also speak. Other people come into the discussion.
So maybe I can continue regarding the repository. That's why we started the FAIR mapping working group with the FAIRcore for EOS colleagues. They have the MSCR service, which is supposed to be a generic mapping repository, where technically you should be able to deposit your IADOPT mappings.
Right, could you leave the reference, Jan, please, in the notes?
So it's MSCR, but I don't
oh, right.
Find a reference.
It's just I might.
It's not live. I don't think it's live yet, but it's the metadata schema and crosswalk registry. I put the link on the website, and I think there might be some further links in the presentation of Jonas from our sessions.
Your session, right? Okay.
So what I just want to say, I would have a wish that it is possible to say in the justification why you are mapping things, and that could also be to make variables interoperable, like a justification based on a specific method. And that could also be I adopt. So I just tell you that could be a possible way, and we can discuss this in more detail with concrete examples and then find out makes sense. Sylvain?
I guess by your other points you were willing to discuss in the minutes remaining, I guess it was also the topic of the proposal for giving I ADOPT a house, a new house for the next.
New home.
Yeah, I'm reusing your terms.
Parents.
Go ahead. Any feedback on the proposal that was on the last slide I presented? Are you guys okay with the process? Trying to move along OMS and societies and groups all together. Is that okay for everyone?
When?
I mean, it'd be nice to have a meeting so that we look at the details, but yeah, definitely very, enthusiastic about it, to look how it.
So it's like, it becomes now grown up, and it needs now other cares too, not just the I ADOPT group, I think. But it would be nice to find a way to collaborate, right, between the.
I think initially we need initial meetings to see how our ideas align, and if there's any issues that we need to clarify first before.
Sirko, what's your point of view here, Sirko Schindler?
Yeah, so from my point of view, we can discuss it, but I'm a little bit unsure about the consequences besides just having a different tag on top of it. Yeah, so OGC has certain established processes that differ from RDAs. So I would like to get a little bit more of a understanding of those before actually voicing an opinion.
Okay, so we will have to organize at least a meeting of the core group of the 5 people, or how many? 7? And then and with the OGC people, I think. What do you think, Alison? You are part of the core group. Do you have any idea or opinion here?
Well, I can see the attraction of having a proper home, a sustainable home for I ADOPT. It becomes, if you like, an official standard. I don't have much experience of working with OGC, so I don't know, would that make it harder for us to continue developing I ADOPT and extending it? Would it mean that we have to go through many more formal procedures in order to add extensions? That's what I'm a bit worried about. So would it hold the work back a little bit? We're still in the stage of developing and adding things at the moment.
Can I ask first, very quick, Sylvain, to answer, and then at the end?
So I have no share in OGC or W3C. Okay, I work for different organization, but I'm more accustomed, by the way, on OGC than W3C process. W3C process I discovered through SOSA SSN. So indeed, there are processes in OGC and SSN, in W3C, sorry. But both activities are community-driven process. So the way I see that, it's like you have kind of a balance stuff. You need to put the kind of the slide overhead added versus the added value and kind of the security visibility of having the ontology hosted there. And what I presented was to say that we should actually try to work both ways, because there is what's in W3C SSN SOSA is this canonical representation of the international standard, okay? That is observation, measurement, and sample. That's an OGC and ISO standard. So we want to push the output of the work on I ADOPT on observable property in both the OGC world and W3C world. Next step, and that's, but we will have more time in a dedicated meeting, is there are some artifacts that started within OGC. Let's consider that in kind of an incubation chamber, and that finally ended up in the ISO version of the standard. So to tell the things differently, if we push that work in the OGC observation measurement and sample group, then it could, when we meet the next revision of the international standard, we could, who knows, end up in an observable property part in the OGC ISO standard. So which will give even more force, power to what's in I ADOPT. There's more reuse, there's more visibility. So that's discussion to have. Okay, it's not kind of hijacking or it's not really hijacking. See, let's say hijacking the baby I ADOPT. It's just giving it. Yeah, Barbara was taking the example of having a grown up and just fostering and helping it. It's more what we trying to achieve here.
Thank you very much, Jan. Can you conclude? We are already at the end.
Also, there's something that we are working on for the mapping process in Fair Impact. Some of you already contributed, but we are in Fair Impact, we're looking at mappings both ways. The technical way, how do you share, how do you represent and document, but also the other way, what are the practices or common practices or a common workflow you could use when you start thinking about the mapping process, because often there's a lot of questions you don't necessarily know where to start. And the idea is to build something coming out from the communities that already have been doing a lot of mapping, so that we gain from more experienced community, we get a sort of common framework that's being tested. So I encourage you, there will be a third workshop, I don't know yet when, to discuss that, and there will be some documentation available. But if you're interested, I mean, mapping is representing the mapping, but it's also what do you need to plan before, right? What do you need to think of before? And I agree, then for OGC, I've been working with OGC, it's pretty well structured. So it's different from RDA, where everything is free and it's your own organization. However, the fact that it's structured, as he says, has advantages, because it can be pushed to an ISO standard or a W3C standard, which has also, well, good value for I ADOPT. I mean, it's a good way forward. But there is an overhead, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your contribution. I would just say that finish now and say that we are working really on getting fundings for creating an I ADOPT service, because at the moment it's just a manual work and a lot of, you know, very semantic specialist work. It's not for normal researchers to do this. It's really hard. But if we get it automatized, it will really help us in annotating research data and making it more interoperable. So thank you very much again. And I think it was a very interesting exchange of ideas and contributions. Bye.
Right.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Does somebody know if the comments of the Zoom chat will be somehow stored somewhere? I hope so. There's a recording, then all will be fine.